What's going on? Welcome back to the channel. First of all, I want to start off the video with advertising a tournament. We have another tournament on Sunday, December 14th at 2 p.m. EST. There's going to be a prize pool of $100 and deluxe pack Lily. So sign up. Everything is going to be in the description below. And without further ado, I hosted a tournament this weekend and basically it went pretty well. We had 122 attendees. We basically started this when we had about like 2 days notice, and it filled up pretty fast, as you can see here on the screen. 122 players, a lot of the basic, competitive decks that you always see on the ladder with an interesting twist. If we go to the metagame here, right? The metagame, you do have many decks that were, being showcased in this. So we definitely had about like 24 Greninja Suicune variants, 16 Hydreigon Mega Absol, 14 Mega Altaria and Indeedees. We had 10 Greninja Mega Absols, 7 Decidueyes, 6 Mega Blaziken and Heatmore. I'm just going to skip down a little bit, down to double Blaziken. We had 2 of those. So the reason I'm pointing that out, right? Out of all these decks that we are seeing, our top cut consisted of a bunch of Blaziken and Greninja Suicune variants, which is kind of rare in this metagame because literally you do see Altaria and Indeedee doing really well, but like for some reason in this tournament they placed really well, and I want to show those off. And not only that, we are gonna go over every other decks. I'm just gonna go over the interesting decks that I've seen on many other tournaments that have been going on as of this week. So let's get started with the first interesting deck that I want to go over. Is there's a Mega Altaria version running around with Greninja. So this deck right here works and synergizes really well. On paper it doesn't look like it's really good, but it performs really well, and it's kind of like strong. And the ability that you get to play copycat, so you could have the consistency for the Froakie, and not even that, you could just use and find your Altaria with that method. Running into Oricorio could be a problem here because you're primarily playing Psychic Energy, but at the same time, as long as you can start pinging anybody's Mega Pokemon or Ace Pokemon, and you have your Cyruses, which you're most likely always going to see, deck is going to perform really well. And I want to try this out myself during this week because this deck is really strong, and not only in my tournament and many other tournaments, I have been seeing this deck do really well, and the concept overall is just really strong. And then Chingling is really good because you're seeing a lot of Greninja being played in the format, and if you could just stop your opponent evolving into Greninja, that's really strong. And especially, Hydreigons and Blaziken and Decidueye as well. Chingling is just one of those cards you can't be overlooked. And, if there's a chance or a way you could fit it into your deck, I would recommend, fitting it in. We have version of Greninja EX with Indeedee that basically won our tournament. Our tournament had 2 Greninja EXs. This one right here is pretty strong overall. I could see why he prioritized Greninja EX over the regular Greninja, because like overall the ability that you could just swap into Suicune, you could turn off the draw engine whenever you want, and you don't have to experience the downside of retreating manually with your 2-cost retreat with Suicune. It's pretty nice, and you're always hitting for 100 damage for 2 water energy, so you don't have to be dependent on the board in order to advance your gameplay. And then you got Indeedee for healing, and then Copycat for consistency. Mars is always going to be that good card that's going to be for hand disruption. Cyrus is great, you're playing Greninja, the 2 cards go really well together. Double Giant Cape has become a standard in all water decks, and Irida, and then you got your Pokeballs and then rare candies. This deck is super strong no matter how you put it, because the next deck I'm going to show you is really identical, but the only real difference, they're playing double Cyrus, which makes sense because you're playing double Greninja, right? Not double Greninja EX. And this is the version that ended up winning Pocket Mad's tournament as well. So, you know, this deck, just any variant of Greninja EX with Indeedee is really strong. Indeedee replacing Giratina is really good, and just overall the best pick, and just it's just showing its true power in all these tournaments and on the ladder. Just overall one of the best decks not to mess around with because it's really consistent. Suicune's the best draw engine in the game right now. And yeah, there's not much to say prior to the, you know, other explanation that I gave. The next deck I want to bring up is a Magnezone. Magnezone Oricorio is kind of really strong, and just overall, people are not playing the Chingling anymore. This variant is kind of straight to the point, and you know, hopefully it helps with the consistency because, right, you don't have Chinglings messing up the draws or any other cards because you play double Copycat for the consistency here. And I understand why you don't want to play other Pokemon that, you know, could like just mix with your consistency. So, you know, if you start the Magnemite, oh well, so be it. But like the odds will be so much better. You know, you just drop everything on the board. Your only two Pokemon that you could have on the bench is Oricorio and Magnemite. So you definitely want to get that Magnemite on the field as soon as possible. And this is basically kind of like a 50-50 because you're either starting Magnemite or Oricorio, not none of that Chingling or, you know, other variants of this deck where they play Froakie or anything else. So this is just straight to the point, into your face. The one card that I like about this deck is Guzma. The fact that people are not respecting Guzma right now, it's kind of crazy because there's so much Giant Cape and Rocky Helmet in the metagame. Guzma just clears up everything, and you know, it clears the path for Magnezone in order to just push for game. And you know, the Giant Cape in this deck making Magnezone just have what, 160 HP is kind of crazy. It's insane. Pokemon Center Lady is always good to have, you know, just make your Magnezone more annoying, or keep Oricorio alive at all costs, because you know, a lot of decks do struggle with Oricorio, and you know, Hydreigon is basically the only type of deck that could destroy this deck. But we're gonna go into a different deck here. This deck right here is Greninja, Zeraora, and Oricorio. Shoutouts to Jimbo for topping with this deck right here. Not to mention, he mentioned that Amoose was the one that came up with this deck as well. So this deck is also really strong. You have Zeraora and Oricorio just putting in 50 damage as soon as possible, and then you have Greninja in the back row just attacking everything on the board. And not to mention, you're running Rocky Helmets where your opponent is forced to attack, and they have to take down 3 different Pokemon, right? And with that being said, it's basically they're taking 20 damage each turn, potentially 40 damage each turn, plus 50 from Zeraora. So they're gonna take 20 from the Rocky, 20 from Greninja, and then 50 from Zera. So it's one of those decks that just works once you have the combo like all set up. It's diabolical, it's insane. And you know, I recommend you guys give it a try. Jimbo always plays it on the ladder, and it has brought him a lot of success. Yeah, the deck is really good and consistent, and that's what you want in this current meta. The last deck I want to talk about is one of the Blaziken decks that came in second place in my tournament. He did end up playing 1 Rocky Helmet, 1 Giant Cape, which ended up working out for him. Normally, I would play this with 1 Rocky Helmet, double Rocky Helmet, but overall performed really well for him. Playing double Cyrus in this build is really good because you have access to Heatmore. You could like put pressure on your opponent's Mega Pokemon and, you know, just Cyrus everything in. And you know, red card for Disruption, Copycat is really good in this deck because you definitely do need the consistency for Mega Blaziken. You always want Mega Blaziken in the hand. And yeah, alright, so I want to talk about this Gyarados deck too. This Gyarados deck is really interesting. It ended up winning a tournament last Friday as well. Just overall, I thought Mega Gyarados was one of those cards that really flopped, but this deck right here proves it wrong. So like the Penguin, I don't even know, SQ is really strong because you take 40 less damage for the first hit when it has full HP, and for 2 energy it does 50 damage, which is pretty decent. It could just give you so much more time to like set up your Gyarados, or just stall once you know, one of your Mantikes or Manaphy is gone. This build ended up playing the Magikarp that has the waterfall attack, so you can get the Mega Gyarados consistently. And then, you know, obviously you're gonna run the best card, which is Misty. Misty is insane, and they're running double heavy helmet. The heavy helmet is really strong on Gyarados, so you take 20 less damage, which is really good for this. And then overall you play the best water cards, like for Irida, and I already mentioned Misty. Then you play Copycat for consistency, May as well, because in this type of deck, you know, you're playing a lot of the little Pokemon, so it's always good to, you know, find your pick. And then you play Repel, Red Card, and Pokeball. It's really interesting that he ended up playing Repel and won that tournament. I would have probably went for like Sabrina or something like that, or second Cyrus, depending on, you know, how everything looks. But like, Repel ended up working really well for him. And then again, you know, we are in that type of format where like Absol's running around and Suicune, so Repel could still see really good play. It could be like a really good meta call too. And if people are playing Oricorios, you could definitely get the Oricorio out of the field as fast as possible with Repel. So this deck is really strong, and I would recommend you guys try it out if you guys are a fan of Mega Gyarados as well. But anyways, like, comment, subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Peace.